The preacher's words were still echoing when Evelyn felt the iron grip of fate close around her throat. By the law of this land, you are now bound. Bound not to the man whose letters she had hidden under her pillow, not to the boy who had stolen kisses behind the barn under a harvest moon, but to the tall, silent warrior who stood across from her with his arms folded like iron bars and eyes that betrayed nothing. The old church creaked as if the timbers themselves disapproved. Dust motes danced in the sunlight slanting through the crooked shutters, but no warmth reached Evelyn's skin. The room smelled of cedar polish, leather, and sweat, heavy with the hush of 30 people packed in silence. She could hear her own pulse thundering in her ears, could feel her palms damp against the folds of her dress. She had not chosen this marriage. Her father had. And when John Holcomb made a decision, no one, not his daughter, not the preacher, not the law, had ever managed to undo it. Across the pews, people whispered. A few women clutched their shawls tighter, casting pitiful glances toward Evelyn, as though pity could mend a heart being split in two. The men, ranchers with dust in their beards and whiskey on their breath, leaned forward, eyes sharp, watching. Not the bride, but the warrior. He was an outsider in every way, a storm that had ridden into their town wrapped in silence and menace. He was taller than any man Evelyn had ever seen, broad-shouldered, his long black hair bound in a single braid. Down his back, his skin, sun-burnished and scarred, told the story of battles fought in places she could not imagine. He wore no Sunday coat, no polished boots, only a leather vest stitched with beads and a belt heavy with knives. The preacher's Bible trembled in his hand as he closed it, perhaps knowing, as Evelyn did, that this was no union blessed by God, but by debt, desperation, and unspoken threats. Evelyn's eyes darted toward the back of the church, and there he was. Daniel, her Daniel. He stood apart from the others, fists clenched so tightly she thought he might crush his own bones. His jaw worked, his chest rose and fell in rapid bursts. A single bead of sweat rolled down his temple, though the church was cool in shadow. When their eyes met, Evelyn's breath caught. She wanted to run to him, wanted to throw herself into the arms that had once felt like home. But her father's shadow loomed large on the pew beside her, his stern gaze warning her of what defiance would cost. She remembered the fight just nights before. "Papa, please," she had begged, clutching his sleeve. "I love Daniel. You know I do." Her father's expression had been stone. "Love doesn't pay debts. Love doesn't keep land. This marriage will. You're giving me away to a man I don't know. To a man who can save us," he snapped, shoving her hand aside. "You'll do as I say." And that was that. Now, as the preacher cleared his throat and muttered the final "Amen," Evelyn felt the weight of her father's decision settle on her shoulders like chains. The warrior coda they had called him shifted slightly, his boots scuffing the floor. His eyes flicked toward her, unreadable, almost cold, but not cruel. He did not reach for her hand. He did not speak. He simply stood, a wall of flesh and silence. While the murmurs in the crowd grew louder, the first clap of hands rang out hesitant, forced, and then others followed, though it sounded less like celebration and more like the rattle of a drum at a hanging. Evelyn's throat tightened. Daniel's hand twitched toward the pistol at his hip. Her breath stilled. One wrong move, one spark, and this church could turn into a coffin. Coda's gaze shifted, meeting Daniel's across the room. For a heartbeat, the air between them felt like lightning about to strike. Then Coda's expression hardened, and Daniel's fist fell back to his side. But his eyes, those burning blue eyes, never left Evelyn. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding with a single, desperate truth. This marriage was a cage, and Daniel was the only man who might yet break her free. The murmurs of the congregation still lingered in Evelyn's ears as the preacher closed his Bible and stepped back, as though he wanted no part of what had just been sealed. The air inside the little church was heavy, stifling, as if the walls themselves had soaked up the tension. Evelyn's chest rose and fell too quickly. Her breath caught in her throat, and then the warrior spoke. His voice, deep and gravelly, cut through the low hum of voices like the crack of a whip. "She is mine," Coda said. "Not because I wanted her, but because her father gave her." Every head turned sharply toward him, and the whispering ceased. His words carried no joy, no triumph, only a cold statement of fact, and yet it landed on Evelyn like another set of shackles. Her father sat stiff-backed in the front pew, chin lifted, as though those words had been the victory he had fought for. Evelyn's hands balled into fists at her sides. Heat surged to her face, not just shame, but fury. She wanted to scream. That she was not a prize, not land to be traded, not cattle to be sold. But her father's eyes bore into her with that same stern command he had carried all her life, warning her against rebellion. She turned her head, desperate for Daniel. He stood in the back of the church, still as a post, but his face betrayed him. His jaw tightened, his lips pressed into a white line, his fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. Evelyn knew that look. He was trying to stop himself from drawing his pistol. His blue eyes burned with a rage she had only seen once before. The night a ranch hand had cornered her in the barn, and Daniel had bloodied the man's face until her father dragged him off. That same fire was in him now, only stronger. The weight of it filled her with both hope and fear. One wrong move, and Daniel would kill this warrior or be killed by him. The silence in the church thickened, broken only by the creak of the pews as townsfolk shifted uncomfortably. Some men's hands hovered near their gun belts. Even the preacher's fingers twitched as he clutched the edge of the pulpit. Evelyn's father finally rose, his boots clattering against the wooden floor. He turned, sweeping his gaze across the crowd. "The debt is settled," he declared, voice loud and unyielding. "My daughter is wed, and there will be peace. That's the end of it." But the end of it, Evelyn knew, had only just begun. Coda moved closer, his shadow stretching over her. She stiffened, but he did not reach for her hand. Instead, his gaze swept the room, pausing only once on Daniel. It was not a glare, not even a threat, but a look that spoke volumes. "I see you. I know what you are to her, and I will not turn my back." Daniel's nostrils flared, his chest rising and falling. His fingers brushed the grip of his Colt, and Evelyn's heart seized. She almost called out his name, almost begged him not to do it, but Coda turned then, breaking the moment, his voice low and commanding. "We ride at sundown." It wasn't a question. It was a declaration. Her stomach dropped. He meant to take her away, away from Daniel, away from the town, away from everything she had known. The thought chilled her more than the church's draft. She remembered the night before, the desperate meeting behind the barn. Daniel's hands had gripped hers so tight her fingers still ached from it. "Run with me," he had pleaded. "We'll ride south, past the river, past all of this. I'll build you a house with my own two hands if I have to. And Papa?" she whispered, tears burning her eyes. "He'll never forgive you," Daniel admitted, his voice breaking. But better his anger than this. She had wanted to say yes. God help her, she had wanted to. But she had seen the men her father owed, had seen the ledgers, the notes signed, with her father's shaking hand. Debt so deep it could drown them all. And now she stood here, chained to the warrior who had come to collect. Coda's voice rumbled again. "I will take her from this place. There will be no more fighting, no more killing. This marriage stands." Her father nodded, satisfied. The townsfolk murmured agreement, eager to believe the matter closed. but Evelyn felt the storm gathering like thunder in her bones. Daniel's eyes burned into her, and she knew what he was thinking. This wasn't the end. Not for him, not for her, and not for the warrior who had just claimed her in front of them all. The church doors groaned open, spilling Evelyn into the blinding afternoon sun. The crowd that had packed the pews spilled out too, following at a cautious distance. Dust swirled at her feet, whipped by the hot wind clinging to the hem of her. Dressed. Koda stood waiting beside a tall, coal-black horse, its flanks gleaming with sweat. The animal pawed the ground, snorting, as if it too sensed the tension in the air. Evelyn's stomach knotted when she realized there was only one saddle. She would ride with him pressed close to a stranger who had just claimed her as though she were a parcel handed off in a trade. Daniel was still in the shadows of the church door. His blue eyes burned into her, his jaw working as though words were choking him from the inside out. Evelyn wanted to run to him, to bury her face in his chest, to feel his strong arms lift her away from all of this. But her father's voice cut through the crowd. "Go on, girl." Her heart sank. Koda mounted. In one fluid motion, every movement controlled, deliberate. He leaned down, extending a strong, calloused hand. His face betrayed nothing, no joy, no triumph, not even cruelty. Just necessity. Evelyn hesitated, trembling with anger, but her father's hard stare gave her no room for rebellion. She placed her hand in Koda's. His skin was hot from the sun, his grip firm as he pulled her up into the saddle before him. The crowd murmured, shifting like restless cattle. Evelyn sat rigid, her back against the wall of Koda's chest, every nerve in her body screaming. She could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her spine. Daniel's hand twitched toward his Colt. She saw it, felt it, feared it. "Don't," she mouthed, her eyes locking with his. His nostrils flared, his chest heaving, but he held his ground, his fury restrained by a thread thinner than spider silk. He would not draw, not yet. Koda clicked his tongue, and the horse surged forward. The crowd parted, whispers rising like smoke as they passed. Evelyn's father tipped his hat, the debt finally behind him. The preacher looked down, unwilling to meet her gaze. Daniel stood frozen, watching as the woman he loved was carried away. The town faded quickly, its clapboard buildings shrinking against the endless stretch of prairie. Wind rushed past Evelyn's ears, carrying the dry scent of sage and dust. The horizon rolled out before her in waves of tall grass, the sky an ocean of blue without a cloud in sight. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like a cage. Koda said nothing. For miles, the only sounds were the pounding hooves, the creak of leather, and Evelyn's uneven breaths. She sat stiff as a board, her hands clutching the fabric of her skirt, determined not to lean into him, not to give an inch. But as the sun lowered and shadows grew long, her defiance began to crack under exhaustion. The horse slowed to a trot, then to a walk. Koda's arm shifted slightly to steady her when she swayed in the saddle, though he never touched her more than necessary. Finally, as the horizon bled red with sunset, he pulled the horse to a halt near a dry creek bed. He dismounted and held up his hand to help her down. She ignored it, sliding off on her own, landing unsteadily on the packed earth. Her knees trembled, but she forced herself upright. Koda glanced at her, expression unreadable, before leading the horse to a patch of grass. He unpacked a small bundle dried meat, a skin of water, flint, and steel. His movements were silent, efficient, like a man who had done this 1,000 times. Evelyn stood a few paces away, arms wrapped around herself. She hated the silence. It felt like he was swallowing every thought she wanted to scream. Finally, the words burst from her lips. "You think you can take me out here and I'll just forget him?" Her voice cracked, but her anger sharpened it. "I will never belong to you. Never. Coda paused, the flint in his hand catching the last light of the sun. His dark eyes lifted to meet hers. For the first time, she thought she saw a flicker of something, weariness, perhaps, or sorrow. I did not ask for this, he said quietly. But you are here, and so am I. The words hit her harder than she expected. She wanted to retort, to spit venom, but instead she stood speechless as he bent to strike a spark into the waiting tinder. Flames leapt, small but steady, painting his face in firelight. The prairie night closed in around them, coyotes howling in the distance. Evelyn wrapped her arms tighter around herself. She hated him. She hated her father. She hated fate itself, and yet she could not shake the truth. She had seen in his eyes. Coda was not her captor alone. He was a prisoner, too. The fire snapped and spat sparks into the prairie night, each ember flaring briefly before dying into the shadows. Evelyn sat with her knees drawn to her chest, her skirts gathered tightly, trying to keep the chill of the evening air from seeping into her bones. She hated the silence almost as much as she hated the man who shared it with her. Coda sat across the flames, his broad shoulders glowing in the flicker of firelight. Shirtless, he looked carved from stone muscle and sinew-shaped by years of battle and survival. Tribal beads and bone ornaments lay against his chest, gleaming when the flames caught them. He seemed as immovable as the mesas on the horizon, his expression unreadable. His dark eyes flicked to her only once, then back to the fire as though her rage meant nothing. Finally, Evelyn could no longer bear it. "You think you can buy me like cattle?" she hissed. Coda's hand stilled on the strip of dried meat he had been cutting. For a long moment, he said nothing, and the silence pressed down on her like a weight. Then his gaze lifted, steady and piercing. "You think I wanted this?" The bitterness in his tone startled her. His words, deep and gravelly, cut through her anger like a knife. Evelyn blinked, thrown off balance. "You didn't fight it," she stopped. "You stood there and let them chain me to you." His jaw clenched, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a low rumble of frustration. "My brother, he," said her heart thudded. "What about him?" Coda stared into the flames, as if the fire held memories she could never touch. "He is a prisoner," he said slowly, "taken by your father's allies. They demanded something in return for his life." His eyes darkened. "They demanded this marriage." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, her anger faltered. She had known her father was cruel, stubborn, greedy beyond measure. But to barter her freedom against the life of another man, this she had not imagined. My father. He did this? Her voice cracked, though she already knew the answer. Coda gave a single grim nod. "I chose between my brother's death or this union. So I stood silent at the altar." The fire popped, sending sparks drifting into the night sky. Evelyn stared at him, her mind reeling. She wanted to hate him, needed to hate him, but the truth twisted her fury into confusion. He was no victor, no captor reveling in his prize. He was bound, just as she was. Evelyn's throat ached. She thought of Daniel, her Daniel standing in that church with his fists clenched, his fury burning like wildfire. He would never believe this union was anything but forced. He would see. Only betrayal, only that she had been taken by another man. Tears burned her eyes, but she forced them back, unwilling to let Coda see her break. "You could have refused," she whispered, her voice sharp, desperate. "You could have fought." Coda's eyes met hers, dark and unyielding. "And my brother would hang from their ropes by now." The finality of his tone struck her like a blow. For the first time, Evelyn saw not the silent, stoic figure who had carried her away, but a man carved by sacrifice-bearing chains of his own, forged by loyalty and blood. The prairie wind sighed through the tall grasses. Coyotes called in the Distance, their cries carrying across the open land. The fire between them crackled and hissed, its glow carving shadows on their faces. Evelyn hugged her knees tighter, torn between fury and an ache she could not name. She thought of Daniel, somewhere out there in the dark, plotting, burning with the fire of love and vengeance. She thought of Coda's brother, bound and waiting, his life hanging by a thread, and she thought of herself caught in the middle, a pawn in a game played by men who claimed to know what was best. Her voice was a whisper when it finally broke the silence. So we're both prisoners. Coda's gaze softened, just for an instant, like the brief glimmer of a star through storm clouds. Yes, he said simply. The admission sat heavy between them, heavier than chains, heavier than vows. Evelyn turned her face away, staring into the endless dark of the prairie. Somewhere out there, Daniel was waiting, restless and desperate. Somewhere out there, a storm was gathering, and in the firelight she realized this uneasy bond with Coda built, not on choice but on sacrifice, would either break them both, or bind them in ways she could not yet imagine. Daniel had not slept in 2 nights, not since he'd stood in the back of that church, fists clenched, while the woman he loved was handed to another man as though she were no more than a coin tossed across a table. The image of Evelyn, pale and trembling in her wedding dress, haunted him every time he closed his eyes. He saw her lips part as if to cry out, saw the way her gaze had found him pleading, desperate before the warrior hauled her into the saddle and carried her into the horizon. The saloon smelled of whiskey and smoke. Daniel sat at a table in the corner, a half-empty glass in front of him, his hat pulled low. The piano had gone quiet when he walked in, the air thick with whispers. Folks had always known he and Evelyn were closer than her father approved of, but now the whole town knew the truth. The looks they gave him were sharp, pitying, and some outright fearful. A rancher with a red beard leaned toward another man, speaking low but not low enough. "Boy's gone half mad since she was taken. He'll bring trouble down on all of us." Daniel's hand twitched toward the pistol at his hip. He didn't draw, not yet, but his silence was enough to make both men shift in their seats, suddenly. Remembering the whiskey in their glasses, he tipped back his own drink, the burn of it chasing the bitterness down his throat. Trouble? He was trouble now. Love had made him an outlaw before he had fired a single shot. Sheriff Gaines tried once to stop him. He found Daniel outside the blacksmith's shop, oiling his revolver with hands that shook from rage rather than nerves. "Daniel," the sheriff sighed, voice low, cautious. "Don't do something you can't take back." Daniel's laugh had been sharp, humorless. "You think I can take this back? You think I can drink it away? Evelyn is out there, tied to a man she doesn't love. And I'm supposed to sit quiet while her father sells her off like cattle?" The sheriff rubbed the back of his neck. "You'll get yourself killed if you ride after them. Maybe get her killed too." That had silenced Daniel, but only for a moment. He holstered the Colt with a sharp click. "Then I'd rather die trying and live here doing nothing." The sheriff saw it in his eyes. There was no stopping him. He shook his head and walked away, muttering, "God help you, boy." Now Daniel sat in the saloon, every muscle in his body coiled, his ears straining for any scrap of news. He had already pressed every ranch hand, every drifter, every trader who rode in from the prairie. Most shook their heads, unwilling to speak of the warrior. Some said they saw the pair riding west, others swore it was north toward the river. No story matched. It gnawed at Daniel until he felt his sanity slipping. The bartender set a fresh bottle on the table, his hand cautious. "You ought to let this be, son. Ain't your fight." Daniel's head snapped up, eyes blazing. "Ain't my fight?" His voice cut through the room, sharp as a blade. "She's mine. She's been mine since the day we were kids running the creek beds. She belongs with me not. His words strangled in his throat, fury choking him. The bartender backed away. The room fell silent. Daniel's chest heaved, his knuckles white on the glass. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, steadier, but no less fierce. I don't care if I have to ride into hell itself. I'll bring her back. That night, under the cover of darkness, Daniel saddled his horse. The moon was a pale slice above the plains, the wind sharp with the scent of sage. He checked his colt, polished and loaded, strapped a rifle across his back, tied a bedroll to the saddle dot as he mounted. He glanced once at the town, silent and sleeping. He could almost hear Evelyn's voice in his memory, soft and trembling, the night before. She was taken. Run with me, she had whispered. Run before it's too late. He pulled the reins tight. I'm coming, Evie, he murmured to the wind, and with that, Daniel spurred his horse forward, vanishing into the darkness. The prairie stretched before him, endless, dangerous, unforgiving. But so was his love, and nothing, no father, no warrior, no debt of blood or land would keep him from her. The prairie dawn bled into the horizon, painting the world in gold and crimson. Sarah woke to the chill of the morning air, her prairie dress damp with dew, her body weary from restless sleep on the hard ground. The campfire had burned low little, more than smoldering embers now, but her eyes found the man across from her immediately. The warrior sat still as stone, his broad chest bare, his bronze skin glowing faintly in the first light. His long black hair, loose now, stirred in the fuzz. Morning breeze. Tribal jewelry of bone and beads draped across his chest, catching sparks of sunlight. He looked like part of the land itself, carved from it. Timeless and untamed, yet for all his strength, Sarah could see the weight he carried. His dark eyes lingered not on her, but on the endless horizon. As though searching for answers buried in the vastness of the earth, she broke the silence first. You think I chose this, she whispered, her voice rough from the night. But I didn't, and you didn't either, did you? His head turned slowly toward her. For a long moment he said nothing, but the faint twitch in his jaw betrayed the storm behind his calm exterior. Finally, he spoke, his deep voice low but steady. I was given no choice. My people needed peace. Your people needed land. They thought binding us together with vows would keep both from bloodshed. Sarah hugged her arms around herself, her breath trembling. And what about love? What about Daniel? At the mention of his name, a shadow flickered across the warrior's eyes. The cowboy, he said simply. Not with anger, just recognition. He had seen the way Daniel's fists had clenched, the way his whole body had tensed when Sarah was led away. A man ready to fight the world for her. Yes, she said firmly, her voice breaking. The man I was meant to marry, the man I love. Silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk circling above. Sarah's heart pounded, her throat dry. She had expected rage, mockery, even violence. Instead, the warrior looked down, his strong hands curling into fists against his thighs. Love, he said slowly, as if tasting the word. Among my people, it is not given lightly. It is fire, it is earth, it is spirit. But here, he gestured toward the town in the distance, toward the world that had forced their union. Here it is traded like cattle, bound in paper, spoken in churches with men watching. His bitterness cut her, but not more than the truth of it. She bowed her head, tears burning her eyes. You don't deserve this either, she murmured. You deserve someone who chooses you, not someone who dreams of another when she closes her eyes. For the first time, his gaze softened. He studied her, her pale skin, her trembling lips, the ache in her voice. Then, With surprising gentleness, he reached into a leather pouch at his side and pulled out a small carved figure made of bone. A hawk, wings spread wide. "This was my mother's," he said quietly. "She told me to give it only when I had chosen my heart." He pressed it into Sarah's hands. "I give it to you not as a husband, but as a man who understands." Sarah stared at the carving, her breath catching. "Why me?" "Because you are honest," he replied. "You told me of your heart. You gave me truth instead of lies." The weight of his words struck her harder than she expected. She clutched the carving tight, her heart torn between sorrow and gratitude. At that very moment, a shout echoed across the prairie. Both their heads snapped up. On the ridge beyond the tall grass, Daniel appeared astride his horse, his figure framed by the rising sun. His hat was pulled low, his revolver gleamed at his side, and his eyes burning with fury and desperation. "Locked on her, Sarah!" he roared, the name tearing from his throat. Her breath hitched. Her heart leapt. But then she looked back at the warrior, silent, still, his face unreadable, though his jaw clenched like iron. The choice that had haunted her was suddenly upon her, to remain in the bond forged by duty, or to risk bloodshed by running back to the man she loved. The prairie held its breath. The sky bled red as the sun dipped low, painting the prairie in firelight. Mary stood between two men, the warrior and Daniel, her heart beating so loudly she could hear it echo in her ears. Dust swirled around their boots, carried by the restless wind. The town gathered at a distance, watching, whispering, waiting to see how fate would carve its mark on this moment. Daniel's hand hovered near his revolver, fury flashing in his eyes like lightning across a storm. He looked broken, betrayed. A man who had spent his whole life taking what he wanted, but now stood on the edge of losing it all. The warrior stood motionless, shirtless and resolute, his bronze skin glowing beneath the fading sun. His long black hair shifted like a dark river in the breeze, and the tribal jewelry across his chest caught the dying light. His presence carried no threat, yet his stillness spoke of unshakable strength. He looked at Mary, not with demand or desperation, but with quiet dignity. Mary's throat burned as she whispered, "I cannot be owned. Not by marriage forced upon me, not by jealousy, and not by fear." Her words cut through the silence, sharp as a blade. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You promised yourself to me," he growled, his voice shaking with rage. "He stole you this. Savage stole what was mine." Mary's eyes flicked to Daniel's trembling hands, then back to the warrior, who remained steady, calm, as if his very spirit had been carved from the earth itself. "No one stole me," she said. "You never asked me what I wanted, Daniel. You loved the idea of me, not my heart." The townsfolk shifted uneasily. The preacher who had bound her in marriage days earlier turned away, shame heavy on his face. Daniel took a step forward, his revolver glinting. "If I can't have you, no man will." The warrior's deep voice finally broke the silence, steady as thunder rolling across the plains. "Then you are already lost, cowboy." He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't need to. His stance alone was enough to stop Daniel mid-step, as though some unseen force anchored him in place. Mary stepped between them, her body trembling but her will unbroken. She raised her hands, palms open, facing Daniel. "If you pull that trigger, you'll kill more than me. You'll kill the man you once were, the boy who dreamed of freedom, who longed for the wide skies. Don't let hate chain you." Her words struck like iron against steel. Daniel's shoulders shook, his anger crumbling into grief. His revolver slipped from his hand and hit the dirt with a heavy thud. He turned away, covering his face, his whole frame heaving with ragged breaths. The prairie held its breath. Mary turned slowly toward the warrior. His dark eyes softened, though sorrow lingered within them. He held out the carved hawk he had carried, its wings spread wide as if ready to soar. "You are free," he said simply. "To choose, to walk your own path. Not bound by rope, not by man, not even by me." Her hands trembled as she accepted the figure. She felt the weight of it, the weight of freedom, of choice, of a life no longer defined by fear or duty. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the warrior's face until he was only a silhouette against the flaming horizon. She turned, her voice breaking but steady enough for all to hear. "I choose myself. I choose a life where my heart belongs to." No chains. The crowd gasped, whispering, stunned. The preacher bowed his head. Daniel sank to his knees in the dust, broken but alive. The warrior inclined his head, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. He turned toward the horizon, the setting, sun wrapping him in light as if the prairie itself honored him. With long, steady strides, he walked away, leaving only the whisper of wind in his wake. Mary clutched the hawk to her chest, feeling the fire of the sunset seep into her bones. For the first time in her life, she wasn't someone's possession. She wasn't a pawn. She was free. And freedom, she realized, was the fiercest kind of love there could ever be.